We're talking the Georgia running back room. Is Georgia still RBU? Could we even begin to make that argument? We'll talk about it next on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. I am Daniel. Clint has got the much-deserved day off today, but he'll be back, and the banter will be back as always. Thanks for everybody making us your first listen of the day. Thanks to the everydayers that are here. Thanks to the loyal third segment listeners, the people that stay all the way to the end, the 199. We appreciate all of you. You guys are the reason that this podcast is, the reason that it goes. And yeah, excited to be back on talking about the Georgia running backs. If you missed the last couple of episodes, we are in a little series right now during the off season where we're going through position by position and breaking down how we feel about each position group, giving them a grade heading into the 2025 season. And then we'll kind of use that information to be able to categorize the relative strengths and the relative weaknesses on Georgia's roster. If you missed it yesterday, Clint talked about the wide receivers. Spoiler alert, Clint is higher on the wide receivers than I am. And so if you are optimistic about the wide receivers, then you want to go back and listen to yesterday's episode because you will agree with things that Clint had to say. And then on Monday of this week, we talked about the quarterback situation. We talked about Gunnar Stockton. We talked about Ryan Puglisi. We talked about where Georgia is relative to last year in terms of quarterback play. And so if you're interested in that, you can go back and listen to that as well. But as I mentioned, today is all about the running back room, RBU. In the third segment, I'm going to give you a grade, a letter grade on this entire running back room. But let's start with what's the obvious. Georgia was terrible at running the football last year. Abysmal, near the very bottom of the Southeastern Conference in terms of productivity in the run game. Now, we could say a lot of things. We could talk about the offensive line and how disappointing the offensive line was last year. We could talk about Carson Beck and his turnovers. We could talk about Mike Bobo and the play calling, talk about Stacey Searles. We could talk about a lot of different things. I'm not putting all of that disappointment on the running back room, but certainly when you are 14th in the SEC in rushing and outside of the top 50 in the country in rushing, then you don't really go into the offseason super excited about your running back room. Not only that, but Georgia loses Trevor Etienne, who heads off to the NFL. Trevor Etienne was not the leading rusher on this team last year. The leading rusher on this team last year is actually back, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Trevor Etienne did do some things that I think are going to be difficult for this Georgia running back room to replace. And so it's a significant loss. It's a significant loss in a position that already wasn't very good last year. And now you come into this season, you lose Trevor Etienne, and I don't want to say you don't add anybody. Bo Walker, the freshman, comes in. I think he's got a chance down the road to be decent. You certainly are going to gain some experience from last year's freshman, Chauncey Bowens. We're going to talk about him. Dwight Phillips, we're going to talk about him. But you don't really add anybody. It's not like the wide receiver room where you have completely overhauled the roster. It was terrible last year, and you've brought in a ton of really exciting talent. You don't have that. What you're hoping for if you're Georgia is development and progress, and that leads to improved productivity. So we'll start with Nate Frazier. I'm going to get to some concerns about Nate Frazier, but I want to start here And that is, I think Nate Frazier has the best chance to be a star at running back that Georgia's had in quite some time, right? You look back at the recent running back rooms, right? Since DeAndre Swift, post DeAndre Swift era, right? You've had guys like Brian Harry, and you've had guys like Elijah Holyfield. You've had guys like Kenny McIntosh. You've had good running backs, right? You've had even Zamir White, right? Like you've had good running backs. But I don't know that at Georgia you would classify any or many of those running backs as stars. Now, people are going to point to James Cook, and obviously right now he's one of the premier running backs in the NFL. Zamir White's doing great in the NFL. And Georgia certainly had a lot of productivity from the running back room and guys like Kenny Mack and others. But you didn't have that oomph. You didn't have that premium SEC running back, at least not while they were at Georgia. I think Nate Frazier has a legitimate chance to be that guy. I mean, Nick Saban on College Game Day last year said on the broadcast that he had Nate Frazier rated as the number 1 running back in last year's recruiting class. And with absolutely no due respect to 24/7 and On3 and Rivals, I don't care at all what they think in terms of evaluating talent, nearly as much as I care what Nick Saban thought when he was still an active head coach in college football and recruiting every running back in the country. And he came out and said, I thought Nate Frazier was the best one of the group. So I think that tells you everything that you need to know about what his ceiling is, about what his potential is. And then you saw it last year, Georgia's leading rusher. Now, he didn't have eye-popping stats, but he was Georgia's leading rusher last year. He rushed for 671 yards. He rushed for 5 yards a carry, which is nothing to sneeze at. But I think the ceiling is much, much, much higher for Nate Frazier. I think he has explosiveness. I think he has the ability to make people miss. I think he has the ability to run through contact. And I think this year, as he hopefully stays healthy, we're going to talk about that. But as he gets the lion's share of the carries this year, which, by the way, as long as he's healthy, I think there's a chance this year that we might see a more heavily skewed number of carries going to the RB1 than we have seen in anyone's recent memory at the University of Georgia. I'm not saying it's going to be like Herschel Walker type numbers, but I am telling you that in terms of percentage of carries, if Nate Frazier is healthy, I think he's going to get a lot of them because I think he's the best player in the room by a wide margin. And so I think he's only going to continue to get better and better as he gets those carries if he can stay healthy. So I think Nate Frazier, I'm not saying that I'm not going to evoke the names of some Georgia legendary running backs, right? This is not like me sitting here and being like, this is the next DeAndre Swift. This is the next, DeAndre Swift or Nick Chubb or Sony Michel or whatever. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I am trying to do is tell you that I think this guy's got the potential to be a legitimate star in the SEC in the backfield. I think what we saw in his freshman year was just the tip of the iceberg. And I think we are going to continue to see this guy develop into a premier running back. So that is overwhelmingly the good news for this UGA running back room. Is I think the ceiling for Nate Frazier is way higher than Trevor Etienne. Way higher than Trevor Etienne. So that's great news. The rest of the news is not nearly as great. And we're going to talk about that right after these. But first, I want to let you know about TurboTax. It is tax season, which everyone knows is a huge bummer, unless you use Intuit TurboTax. I've been using Intuit TurboTax for several years now. And listen, my tax situation is not the least complicated thing in the world. I'm not sure if you've ever hosted a podcast and gotten paid for it. But there's all kinds of forms and legalities, and I got money coming in from all sorts of different places. I have multiple jobs, and some of my jobs are weird tax situations. Intuit TurboTax makes it easy. I don't have to pay an accountant thousands of my dollars to do my taxes and tell me that I have to pay the government even more money. TurboTax makes it super easy to get my taxes done. Doing your taxes doesn't have to suck if you use TurboTax. Get every dollar that you deserve, guaranteed, and chat with live tax experts if you want. Do what Clint and I do. Use Intuit TurboTax to get your taxes done. All right, let's talk about before we talk about the Robinson brothers, let's talk about what I think is the Achilles heel, or the downside, if there is one, of Nate Frazier, the area that I think we need to see him improve. Because while he was the leading rusher on Georgia's team last year, and he did average 5 yards a carry, Trevor Etienne also averaged 5 yards a carry. So he led the team not only in total yards, but he led the team tied for the team lead in yards per carry in terms of the featured backs. What we did not see out of Nate Frazier last year was an impact in the passing game. Trevor Etienne caught 32 balls for nearly 200 yards, while Nate Frazier caught 12 balls for 85 yards. He was not featured prominently in the passing game. And I think if he's going to be on the field as much as I think he's going to be on the field, I need to see that number come up. Now, I don't think there are massive deficiencies in Nate Frazier's ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. I expect that with as much as he's going to be on the field this year, I expect he's going to get a lot of checkdowns. I expect that not only are they going to feature him in the passing game a little bit more, but he's going to get a little what I would call garbage receptions. Like the play breaks down, he's in there in pass protection, which, by the way, he improved tremendously throughout the season in pass protection, an area that you would expect a true freshman who's uber talented to struggle early on in his career. And he did struggle early on in his career, but he improved tremendously. And so now you can leave him in there on passing downs. And so he's in there protecting. Gunnar Stockton, breaks the pocket, breaks contain, is on, kind of scrambling, running for his life in a situation where nobody's open. Maybe he's able to find Nate Frazier for a little dump down that he's able to then turn into some productive yards. I expect he'll get more run in the passing game, but we do need to see that improve. And then the fumbles. Last year, ball security, there's no two ways about it. Ball security was a problem for Nate Frazier last year. Now, again, true freshman, and I'm willing to forgive a lot of things. First year playing major college football, first year playing in the SEC. I don't necessarily think he's got ball security issues, like that he's a ball security problem type of back. He was a problem last year turning the ball over. Obviously, if that continues, nothing I said last segment in terms of his potential to be elite running the football, none of that matters at all. If he turns the ball over, none of it matters. He's a liability. He's a bust. You absolutely cannot have him on the field. I don't expect that to be the case. That's why I didn't lead with that. It's not like I think Nate Frazier has massive downsides. I actually think Nate Frazier is as safe of a really good player as Georgia might have on the entire offense. If I were to start ranking players I feel great about on the entire offense, spoiler alert, Nate Frazier's in the top 2 or 3 of that list. I feel really confident in him. Now, The issue is that this is the SEC. And we saw it last year with Trevor Etienne. It's very difficult to stay healthy for 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 games in the SEC. And Georgia is hoping to have that many games this year. And so what does Georgia do? Not only to give Nate Frazier rest, but if and when Nate Frazier sustains what will hopefully be a minor nick or injury next year, because it's going to happen. He's going to miss time due to injury. Everyone who plays running back in the SEC misses time due to injury. When you start looking at who's behind him, you start with the Robinsons, Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson. Okay. I'm not looking forward to this segment. Okay. I just want to say that up front. But I'm going to start here because I think it will be the most succinct thing that I have to say. And I don't really know that I have much in the way of elaboration on it. I don't think we're ever going to see the real Branson Robinson again. I just don't have any confidence that 2022 true freshman Branson Robinson that we saw destroy TCU defenders on his way to the end zone in the national championship game. I think, sadly, due to injury, that guy may not exist anymore. We saw him battle, miss a ton of time, finally come back last year. He did not look like himself. Guys, Branson Robinson was not good last year. He just flat out was not good when he was on the field. Like, he had 25 carries for 73 yards, average less than 3 yards a carry. That doesn't even tell the story. He didn't look confident. He didn't look like he knew where the hole was. He didn't look like he could break a tackle. He didn't look like he had any sort of a breakaway speed to get away from anybody. He just wasn't good. And then we saw him go down with another injury. I think it was maybe the Mississippi State game that he ended up getting banged up in that one as well. I'm not confident that we're ever going to see Branson Robinson again. You can let me know in the comments if you disagree with me. If you think that he's definitely going to come back and be as good as we thought he was going to be. I'm not saying I'm writing him off, but I am not counting on him to do anything. I am only mentioning him as the second guy out of my mouth because I think for the common casual Georgia fan, that's the next name that's going to come up. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think you're going to get anything out of him, like anything. And then we go to Roderick Robinson. Also, some injury concerns. Also, a guy that in the bowl game, right? We see the TCU national championship game in 22 was Branson Robinson's coming out party. Well, the Florida State Orange Bowl game in 2023, by God, was Roderick Robinson's coming out party. He is another incredibly physical and imposing running back that you saw just destroying people in that game. When he's good, but he also has dealt with injuries. We don't know what his health status is going to be coming into the spring, coming into the fall. We don't know how much we're going to see out of him. We don't know how ready he's going to be. And let's just call it what it is. If he's suited up on Labor Day weekend and he's ready to go, that doesn't mean that he's 100%. And even if he's 100%, that doesn't mean that he's going to be the same player that he was. That's just Nick Chubbs don't grow on trees. And I don't mean in terms of talent. I mean in terms of his unbelievable ability to sustain horrific injuries and seemingly not lose a step. That just is not the norm with running backs. And so what are we going to get out of Roderick Robinson? Are we going to get 100% of that potential that we saw? Let me just say this right now. If Roderick Robinson's fully healthy, which I think is a huge question, And if he's 100% of that potential that we saw, he makes a perfect number 2 running back for this Georgia running room. And the combination of Nate Frazier and Roderick Robinson has me as excited as I could possibly be. I'm not overly optimistic that that's going to be the case. I think Roderick Robinson will be a little bit slower coming back than some people hope that he will be. And I just fear that he's going to have lost a step. Now, I could be absolutely wrong about that, and I would love for Rob to prove me wrong. He is a guy that I have really high hopes for, and a guy that I think could absolutely be a significant contributor. And a guy, honestly, I think Georgia desperately needs. If I could pinpoint one guy that I said I need him to outperform my expectations, I think my expectations for Roderick Robinson are pretty low, only because of injuries and what I've seen from people coming back from injuries like that. I think my expectations are pretty low. If I could pick one guy on this Georgia roster that I needed to outperform my expectations, I think it would be him, because if he does, I know what I'm going to get out of Nate Frazier. I already told you that. And I feel like Georgia is in a really good spot at running back. All right, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the 2 true sophomores that I think could factor in to this Georgia running back rotation. But first, these. All right, we talked about the known commodities. And this is the scary part, guys, is there is no Trevor Etienne. I haven't mentioned Cash Jones yet, which is egregious of me. I get. We're in the 3rd segment. There is no Cash Jones. There is no Trevor Etienne. The known commodities are Nate Frazier and 2 guys coming off of injuries that we know nothing about. Like, we literally have no idea how healthy they're going to be. One of them, I've already told you, I don't expect anything from, which means the now 2 known commodities are Nate Frazier and a guy coming off an injury that I really don't know what I can expect from. Which brings us to the 2 guys that I think are the biggest wild cards in this Georgia running back room, and that is Chauncey Bowens and Dwight Phillips. So let's talk about Chauncey Bowens first. Chauncey Bowens was the guy coming out of last year's camp that everyone thought was going to be the true freshman that jumped onto the scene and made an impact. He did have some late season injury situations, which I think really hurt him in terms of his ability to find and play some more meaningful snaps. We saw him on the field last year, but we didn't see him playing all that many meaningful snaps. 16 carries, 58 yards, 3.6 yards a carry. We saw him utilized, but we didn't see him utilized that much. But let's be honest, the Georgia rushing attack last year was so bad that nobody had a good season. I mean, I told you, Nate Frazier rushed for 671 yards. 140 of those yards came against UMass. If you take the UMass game out, Nate Frazier rushed for just about 500 yards, and that's Georgia's leading rusher on the season. Nobody was good. The running attack was absolutely abysmal. We're beating a dead horse when we talk about that. But Chauncey Bowens was the guy that everybody kind of thought was next in line. He has a prototypical SEC running back, Georgia running back body. I really like this kid coming out of high school. I still like him. I think he's got a chance to sort of slide into that number 2 spot if the Robinsons are banged up. I think he's got a chance, a pretty decent chance, to open this season as the number 2 back on Georgia's roster. Now, again, I think Georgia hopefully is going to get big leads in games, which means they're going to try to rest guys as much as they possibly can, which means Nate Frazier is going to get to rest. But I'm here to tell you, when games are tight and they matter, you're going to see more of Nate Frazier than you're used to seeing from any RB1 on Georgia's roster. I just think the gap is really big between the first and second of Georgia's backs. I think maybe Chauncey Bowens really vaults into the picture and surprises us all and closes that gap. Maybe Roderick Robinson is fully healthy and lives up to that potential that we saw at the end of 2023 and closes that gap, and I'm wrong about that. But I think Chauncey Bowens has the best chance to start the season maybe as the second string running back because both the Robinsons are not fully back from injury yet, which means he's going to get a lot of opportunity. He's going to get a lot of run, depending on his health situation in spring practice. Again, I don't know how much if he's fully recovered from the injury stuff that he was dealing with at the end of last year. So we'll see on that once spring practice starts. But in fall camp, hopefully he's a full go and he's ready and he gets a lot of reps with the offense. And we see him in a very productive capacity. The wild card on this roster is Dwight Phillips. He was a gadget player last year. He had one play. He carried it 6 times for 33 yards. And I'm pretty sure it was the same play every time he touched the ball. They had that one is a little half, jet motion sweep where he, came around the end of the line of scrimmage, took a quick handoff from Carson Beck and tried to get the outside. He's fast. He is shifty. He is a different type of weapon than any of the other guys in the backfield. Can Mike Bobo find a way to use him consistently? To which all the Mike Bobo haters are screaming. But is Dwight Phillips good enough to be used consistently? I think that's the bigger question. Is he good enough to be more than just a gadget player? Can he actually be a productive SEC running back? Listen, you're never going to hear me be like, oh, the guy doesn't have the measurables or the size. We've seen too many times in college football, people who are too short, they're too small, they're too slow, they don't have enough arm talent, they don't have enough whatever. We've seen it too many times where that guy goes on to prove everybody wrong and be an elite player. Georgia wouldn't have him on the roster. Georgia doesn't recruit guys who can't become SEC players. The question is, will he develop? Will he take that next step? Will he continue to grow in all the ways that we need to see him grow in order to get more than 6 carries next year, in order to get a decent amount of work? Because, again, I hate to say this because I love Branson Robinson. I love him. But I'm just here to tell you, when I rank the Georgia running backs in terms of what I expect from them this year, Dwight Phillips is number 4 on the list. It goes Nate Frazier, Roderick Robinson, Chauncey Bowens, Dwight Phillips. That's how I rank what I am expecting of them this year. And number 4, guys, is a couple injuries away from being really, really, really important. For example, Nate Frazier was number 4 on the depth chart at times last year. That's a really important player. That's a couple injuries, like I said, away from getting meaningful snaps in meaningful games. So my grade, if you're still here for the Georgia running back room, I'm going to give them a B. And I think it's the reason that they're not higher than that is because I'm terrified of the depth. I'm terrified of what comes next, and I am terrified of an injury to Nate Frazier. But Nate Frazier, I think, is a legitimate star at the running back position. And so I can't go any lower than that because I think if he's healthy, he's going to get he's going to be on the field a ton, and he's going to be an animal out there. So I like the Georgia running backs. I'm nervous about the Georgia running backs, but spoiler alert, that is going to be the case for a lot of these positions. Come back, we're going to talk about the offensive line. We're going to talk about tight ends. We're going to talk about all the defense later on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast, and we will see you guys then.